You're surrounded. Your enemy is inside the fortress you're besieging. Another enemy, 250,000 strong, is marching toward you from outside. You're outnumbered 5-1. Your supplies are running low. Your men are exhausted. Most generals would retreat. Most would call it a loss and live to fight another day. But Julius Caesar didn't retreat. He built a wall. Then he built another wall facing the opposite direction. And then he dared both armies to try and break him. '52 BC. The town of Alesia in central Gaul. This is not just another battle. This is the moment Julius Caesar either becomes the most powerful man in Rome or dies forgotten in a Gallic field. For 8 years, he has been conquering Gaul, burning villages, enslaving tribes, building his fortune, building his legend. But now the Gauls have united under one man. They have found their champion, and they are done running. Today, we're not just telling the story of a siege. We're dissecting the battle that created the Roman Empire. We're going to see how one man, through engineering, ruthlessness, and sheer force of will, turned an impossible situation into the victory that made him unstoppable. This is Alesia, the siege that built an empire. To understand what happened at Alesia, you first have to understand who Julius Caesar was in 52 BC. He was not yet the dictator. He was not yet the legend. He was a Roman politician drowning in debt, running from his creditors, gambling everything on military conquest. He had spent 8 years in Gaul not because he loved war, but because he needed war. Every victory meant gold. Every enslaved tribe meant wealth, and wealth meant power back in Rome. But Caesar was also a military genius. He had modernized the Roman legion. Where other generals relied on brute force, Caesar used speed. His legions could march faster, build faster, and fight faster than anyone else. They could construct a fortified camp in hours. They could build bridges across rivers in days. They were not just soldiers. They were engineers. And that would save them at Alesia. But now, after 8 years of conquest, the Gauls had finally united. Tribe after tribe that had fought each other for generations put aside their feuds. They rallied behind one man, Vercingetorix, a young Gallic chieftain from the Arverni tribe, charismatic, fearless, and unlike the tribal leaders Caesar had faced before, Vercingetorix understood Roman tactics. He knew he couldn't beat Caesar in open battle, so he changed the game. Vercingetorix adopted a scorched earth strategy. As Caesar's legions advanced, the Gauls burned their own villages, they poisoned their own wells, they destroyed their own crops. The message was clear: if you want to conquer Gaul, you will starve doing it. And it was working. Caesar's supply lines stretched hundreds of miles. His men were hungry. His cavalry was depleted. For the first time in 8 years, Julius Caesar was on the defensive. Then Vercingetorix made a gamble of his own. He retreated to the Hilltop Fortress of Alesia with 80,000 warriors. The town sat atop a plateau surrounded by 2 rivers in the valleys below. Steep cliffs protected it on all sides. It was a natural fortress, and Vercingetorix knew that if he could hold out there long enough, a massive relief army from all the Gallic tribes would arrive. Then Caesar would be the one surrounded. Then Caesar would be the one who starved. Caesar arrived at Alesia with 12 legions, roughly 60,000 men. He looked at the fortress on the hill. He looked at the rivers. He looked at the cliffs, and he understood immediately. He could not take Alesia by storm. The walls were too strong. The hill was too steep. A direct assault would be suicide. So Caesar did what Caesar always did. He built. First, Caesar ordered his engineers to dig a trench, not around Alesia, in front of it, A massive ditch, 20 feet wide and 20 feet deep, stretching in a massive arc to cut off the fortress from the surrounding countryside. Behind the trench, his men built a palisade wall, 12 feet high, made of sharpened logs, with watchtowers every 80 feet. This was the Contravallation. The inner wall, designed to keep Vercingetorix and his 80,000 warriors trapped inside Alesia. But Caesar knew the relief army was coming. Vercingetorix had sent riders before retreating into Alesia, calling every Gallic tribe to send warriors. Caesar's scouts reported hundreds of thousands gathering. Some said 200,000, others said more. It didn't matter. The number was overwhelming. So Caesar made a decision that was either genius or madness. He would build a second wall, facing outward. The Circumvallation, the outer wall, stretching 14 miles in a complete circle around the entire Roman position, designed to keep the Gallic relief army out. Think about the audacity of this. Caesar was besieging a fortress while simultaneously preparing to be besieged himself. He was building fortifications in two directions. He was trapping himself between two enemy armies. But he was betting that his walls, his discipline, and his legions could hold against both. The construction took weeks. 60,000 Roman soldiers worked day and night. They dug trenches, they built palisades, they constructed 23 forts and redoubts at strategic points along the walls. They dug 5 rows of sharpened stake pits in front of the walls, hidden under brush, designed to impale charging warriors. They planted iron spikes in the ground, hidden in the grass, to cripple cavalry. The Romans called these defensive obstacles Cippia and Lilia. The soldiers called them Caesar's Gardens of Death. To stop the Gallic tide, Caesar layered his defenses with sadistic ingenuity. First, water-filled trenches to slow attackers. Then came the Cippia, 5 rows of interlocking branches, sharpened to points and buried in the earth to tear through charging lines. Then the Lilies, hidden pits with a single sharpened stake at the bottom, covered with brush to hide them from attackers. And finally, the stimuli, iron barbs hidden in the grass to hook into the feet of men and horses. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix watched. He could see what Caesar was doing. He could see the walls rising. He understood the trap. If the relief army didn't arrive soon, his 80,000 warriors would starve. The Romans had cut off all supplies. The rivers were blocked. No food was getting in. Vercingetorix ordered strict rationing. Then he did something brutal. He expelled all the women, children, and elderly from Alesia. Thousands of non-combatants sent out through the gates, hoping the Romans would let them pass through the lines. Caesar refused. He ordered his men to close the gates of the Roman fortifications. The civilians were trapped in the no-man's land between the walls of Alesia and the walls of the Roman siege lines. They begged for food. They begged for mercy. Caesar gave neither. He knew that if he fed them, his own supplies would run out faster. He knew that if he let them through, they would spread word of his position to the approaching relief army. So he left them there, between the walls, to starve. This was Roman ruthlessness. This was Caesar. For days, both sides watched as families withered and died between the walls, a descent into pure mathematical cruelty. Inside Alesia, food ran out. Vercingetorix's warriors began eating their horses. Then they boiled leather. Then they ate nothing. Morale collapsed. Some warriors wanted to surrender. Others wanted to sally out and die fighting. Vercingetorix held them together. He told them the relief army was coming. He told them to hold on, just a few more days. And then, on the horizon, they saw it. Dust clouds rising in the distance, the sound of thousands of footsteps, horns blowing, banners waving. The relief army had arrived, and it was massive. Modern estimates put the number at 250,000 warriors. Every Gallic tribe had sent men. This was not just an army. This was an entire nation in arms, marching to save their champion. Caesar's legionaries looked at the relief army. They looked at the fortress behind them with 80,000 warriors. They understood. They were trapped between two armies, outnumbered 5-1, surrounded. And Caesar stood on the ramparts and told them this: "Hold the walls, trust the fortifications, trust your training. If we break, we die. If we hold, we win everything." The Gallic relief army did not attack immediately. They set up camp on the hills overlooking the Roman fortifications. Their commander, a chieftain named Commius, studied Caesar's walls. He saw the trenches, he saw the stake pits, he saw the iron spikes. He knew a frontal assault would be a slaughter, so he waited for nightfall. That night, Vercingetorix attacked from inside Alesia. 80,000 Gallic warriors poured out of the gates, carrying bundles of sticks and dirt to fill Caesar's trenches. They charged the inner Roman wall, screaming war cries. At the same time, the relief army attacked from the outside. 250,000 warriors hit the outer Roman wall. Caesar's legions were fighting on two fronts. The Romans held, barely. Legionaries on the walls fought hand-to-hand with Gauls climbing over the palisades. Centurions screamed orders. Reinforcements ran from fort to fort, plugging gaps in the line. Caesar himself rode along the walls, red cloak billowing, rallying his men. Wherever the fighting was thickest, Caesar appeared. His presence was worth a legion. The Gauls fell back at dawn. Thousands lay dead in front of the Roman walls, impaled on stakes, pierced by arrows, crushed in the trenches. But the walls held. Caesar's fortifications had worked. The Romans had survived the first assault, but everyone knew this was just the beginning. For 2 days, the Gauls rested. They buried their dead. They sharpened their weapons. They built siege towers and ladders, and they studied the Roman fortifications, looking for a weakness. They found one. On the northern side of the siege lines, there was a hill. The terrain there was too rough for Caesar to complete the wall all the way around. There was a gap, a weak point, and the Gauls saw it. On the third day, the Gauls launched their main assault. 60,000 warriors from the relief army marched toward the weak point on the northern hill. At the same time, Vercingetorix led his entire force out of Alesia, attacking the inner wall from the opposite side. The plan was simple: split Caesar's forces, overrun the weak point, break through. Once inside the Roman lines, it would be chaos. 300,000 Gauls against 60,000 Romans in close combat. The Romans would be annihilated. Caesar saw the plan unfolding. He sent reinforcements to the northern hill, 6 cohorts, about 3,000 men. To hold against 60,000, it was not enough. The Gauls hit the Roman position like a hammer. They filled the trenches. They overwhelmed the palisade. They pushed the Romans back step by step. The line was breaking. At the same time, on the opposite side of the siege lines, Vercingetorix's warriors were scaling the inner walls. They had built wooden towers. They had siege ladders. They were getting over the palisade. Roman forts were falling. Centurions were dying. The entire southern section of the inner wall was on the verge of collapse. Caesar was losing the battle. And then Caesar made the decision that would define his entire career. He looked at the northern hill where his men were being overrun. He looked at the southern wall where Vercingetorix was breaking through. He had no reserves left. Every legion was already committed, except one: his personal bodyguard, the 10th Legion, his most elite troops, the men who had been with him since the beginning of the Gallic Wars, Caesar's wolves. Caesar mounted his horse. He grabbed a shield. He personally led the 10th Legion toward the northern hill, not to defend, to attack. He was going to charge 60,000 Gauls with 3,000 men. This was insane. This was desperation. This was Caesar gambling everything on one final roll. And it worked! The 10th Legion smashed into the Gallic flank like a spear. They didn't try to hold ground. They drove forward, shields locked, gladies stabbing. Caesar at the front, red cloak visible to every man on the battlefield. The sight of Caesar himself leading the charge broke something in the Gallic warriors. They had been on the verge of victory. Now their enemy's general was charging them personally. They hesitated, and in that hesitation, the Roman line reformed. At the same moment, Caesar sent his cavalry. He had been holding them in reserve behind the fortifications. Germanic Cavalry, mercenaries from across the Rhine. Wild, ferocious horsemen who fought with axes and spears. Caesar unleashed them. They galloped around the outside of the fortifications and hit the Gallic relief army from behind. The Gauls, focused on breaking through the Roman wall, didn't see them coming. The Gallic relief army broke. 60,000 warriors, on the verge of victory, suddenly found themselves trapped between Caesar's 10th Legion in front and Germanic cavalry behind. They panicked. They ran. The retreat turned into a rout. Men threw down their weapons and fled. The Romans pursued, cutting them down by the thousands. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix watched the relief army collapse. He watched them flee. He understood. It was over. He pulled his warriors back inside the fortress walls. And for the first time, the great Gallic champion knew he was defeated. That night, Caesar's men rested. They had held. Against impossible odds, outnumbered 5-1, attacked from both sides, they had held. The fortifications Caesar built, the discipline he drilled into them, the engineering that seemed excessive, all of it had saved them. The Gauls had lost tens of thousands. The Romans had lost hundreds. It was not a battle. It was a masterpiece. The next day, Vercingetorix sent emissaries. He wanted to negotiate. Caesar refused. There would be no negotiation, only unconditional surrender. Vercingetorix had one choice: surrender himself and his warriors or watch his people starve. Vercingetorix made his decision. He dressed in his finest armor, he mounted his best horse, and he rode out of Alesia alone. He rode through the Roman fortifications, he rode to Caesar's camp, and there, in front of the entire Roman army, Vercingetorix dismounted, laid down his weapons, and knelt before Julius Caesar. The great Gallic rebellion was over. Caesar accepted the surrender. He took Vercingetorix prisoner. The Gallic chieftain would spend the next 6 years in a Roman cell. Then, when Caesar finally celebrated his triumph in Rome, Vercingetorix would be dragged through the streets in chains, displayed to the Roman mob, and then strangled in the Tullianum prison. That was the price of defying Rome. The 80,000 Gallic warriors inside Alesia were enslaved, divided among the legions as spoils. Each Roman soldier received one Gallic captive. Families were torn apart. Warriors who had fought for their freedom became property. Alesia was the end of Gaul. 1 million people had been killed. Another million were sold into slavery. This was conquest. This was empire. And Caesar grew rich beyond measure. But the true prize of Alesia was not gold or slaves. It was what happened next in Rome. When news of the victory reached the city, the Senate declared 20 days of public thanksgiving. 20 days. It was unprecedented. Julius Caesar was no longer just another general. He was the conqueror of Gaul, the man who had done what no Roman had done in generations. He was a hero, and he was dangerous. The Senate, led by Pompey and the conservative faction, saw what Alesia meant. Caesar now commanded 12 battle-hardened legions who were fanatically loyal to him personally. He had conquered an entire region, doubled the size of Rome's territory, and filled the treasury with gold. He was more powerful than any single Roman general had been in a century, and that terrified them. So they made a fatal mistake. They ordered Caesar to disband his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen. They thought they could control him. They thought he would obey. They forgot that Caesar had spent 8 years in Gaul not obeying anyone. They forgot that he had survived Alesia by gambling everything. And they forgot that men who survive the impossible stop fearing the possible. In 49 BC, 2 years after Alesia, Julius Caesar stood at the Rubicon River, the boundary between Gaul and Italy. Behind him were his legions. Ahead of him was Rome, and the Senate's order to disband. Caesar looked at the river. He thought about Alesia. He thought about the walls he had built. He thought about the moment he charged into 60,000 Gauls with 3,000 men, and then he crossed. The civil war had begun. At Alesia, the Republic died. The empire was born in a trench of mud and blood. We remember the glory. We forget the geometry of despair. We forget the women and children in the no-man's land. Caesar's greatest victory was his greatest tragedy, because war is not arithmetic. It is the weight of what we are willing to leave behind.